2D animation, hand-drawn, frame by frame. Every line pulled out of somebody's soul, slapped onto celluloid, and painted backgrounds. Yeah, it was beautiful. Now, missing. Presumed dead. Name's Eli Dragon. Private investigator. Unlike our old buddy 2D, I don't work in fairy tales. I work in cold, hard facts. And the facts say somebody had motive for 2D to disappear. To make like a hand-drawn tree and leave. So, I start with the obvious suspect. The new kid in town. The low-poly rat with no soul. CGI. 3D animation.
Actually, it's a lot more complicated than you might think, Eli. I don't think CGI killed 2D animation.
Lexi, this is an investigation. Look at the evidence. It's all right there, black and white.
Okay, Eli, I'll play along. CGI, or 3D animation, has pretty much taken over the animated movie scene over the past few decades. But that was absolutely not the case in the beginning. When I bring up early CGI, you probably think of one company in particular, Pixar, one of the biggest 3D animation pioneers. They started creating shorts, innovating with technology until finally we got Toy Story. But even though Toy Story was a huge achievement as the first fully 3D animated film, it was still pretty rough around the edges. There's a reason why the main characters were toys. It was easier to make toys than believable humans. Andy is cute and all, but I'm not sure he would have worked as a main character back then. And this is what kept CGI limited for a long time, trying to avoid that uncanny valley of human characters. For that, 2D was by far still the go-to method, more expressive and believable.
It's not adding up. If CGI was the killer, it was sloppy. Could barely render human face without looking like a wax museum after a heat wave. No, this wasn't sloppy. This was clean, organized. Which means one thing. I must be looking at the wrong suspect.
The big movie that started to really push past this uncanny valley problem was, oddly enough, probably Shrek. They innovated one of the first styles that really looked good for humans and animals. Yeah, weird, right? Everyone's favorite Disney movie spoof was kind of a technological marvel. Even after having a very rough production process that could be its own video. It did inspire a lot of other 3D movies, like Chicken Little from Disney. Yet another movie that was in production hell for a long time. I think it's fair to say that Shrek worked out better. So 3D animation was getting better. Still slowly, but surely. And in terms of popularity, Toy Story and Shrek already dominated. But they didn't kill 2D animation. It was still everywhere and thriving at the time. In fact, this was a time where 2D animation was having a transition period, going from traditional hand-drawn art to digital art, to make it easier and faster to make. This is about the time you see things like SpongeBob look a bit different between seasons, because it went from cell art, hand-painted on cellophane, layered over painted backgrounds, to digital art. Honestly, most people barely noticed the change, but in terms of production, it was huge. It completely changed the way that they were made. Some of Disney's most interesting movies were coming out in the early 2000s, from things like Lilo and Stitch to Treasure Planet. They were innovative and beautiful, but they weren't doing well in theaters. In fact, many struggled to make a profit.
This breaks the case wide open. See, in my line of work, when something doesn't make sense, you follow the money.
I may love Treasure Planet, but oh boy did that thing not only have trouble getting made, but it was also considered one of the most fantastic failures in 2D animation history. And it has nothing to do with it being a good or bad movie. In fact, the reason it flopped came down to its enormous production cost of $140 million, making it the most expensive 2D animated movie ever made. But also, the poor marketing and timing with holiday movies, having to compete with Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and The Santa Claus 2. It didn't stand a chance. But in the biz, people look for what to blame these things on, and they pointed the finger not at production cost or timing, but at how it was made. It was 2D animation. It made 2D animation look like it was a lot more work than it was worth. Ironically, Treasure Planet employed a lot of CGI in it too. One of the first movies to blend 2D and 3D together so well, although it doesn't age perfectly. Which over time became the standard, both in movies and TV, when it's done well. 2D started looking old-fashioned or nostalgic, while 3D was getting positioned as the cool, new, modern, futuristic animation. Popularity interest for audiences shifted drastically, and it was harder and harder to sell people on the idea of going to see a 2D movie when 3D was up against it. So CGI got better, 2D was flopping in theaters, completely independently of 3D animation, and companies were losing faith that it was worth the cost to make it. It makes sense that they started paying more attention to 3D, which kept coming out with box office hits, and somehow was doing it with teams of new people, less money being spent to pull it off, and even faster turnaround times.
2D didn't lose its touch. It was just too expensive, too risky. In this town, that's the fastest way to get yourself erased. And now the new guy, CGI, was getting faster, better.
There's a huge difference between how 2D and 3D animation is made. I took 3D classes in college, and while it's not my medium of choice, I do see how a beginner could learn 3D better and faster than 2D animation. In 3D, you don't need drawing skills. Sure, you need modelers, but once you have the character made and rigged, you can pass it on to animators who don't need any drawing skills whatsoever, so long as they know how to make the movements of the character and poses. For sure, it's a skill on its own, but it's just the one skill, not having to draw each and every frame yourself. Whole teams of people could work on this and not worry about matching the art styles. It was much more technical framing and posing than it was a handful of skilled artists doing intensive, laborious artwork, like traditional 2D animation, even with the digital age at the time. That means, with entry-level and intermediate artists, could make professional 3D animated movies, where with 2D, you really were limited to hiring the masters of the craft and a team of people to help them as they earn their way up. Nothing wrong with this on paper, but from a studio point of view, considering how expensive these movies were to make, again, with Treasure Planet being the most expensive one there ever was, and it didn't make nearly enough justifying working that way anymore. One of the things that made 2D animation like this more expensive for studios to fund was hiring these 2D industry professionals, because they were unionized. They'd work together to create a union that guaranteed fair pay for their work and expertise. And, well, it costs more to hire experienced union animation teams than it does to build new pipelines around emerging 3D artists and technicians. That, combined with popularity of its new medium, made it seem like a no-brainer to stop putting so much money and attention into 2D and switch almost entirely to 3D. And most studios did. On top of all of that, it wasn't even just the cost of who they hired to work on the projects, but there's a pretty fundamental difference between 2D and 3D that I know all too well as an artist. In 2D, you design a character once, but you need to redraw them every time for every pose and every angle. It's a pretty labor-intensive process, even in limited animation, to have to do that every time. Meanwhile, 3D assets like models and props and backgrounds were endlessly reusable. You can move the camera around for different angles instead of re-rendering everything for every side. And you can literally copy and paste the same character model as much as you want. Once it's modeled and rigged, it's ready to go forever. It's the reason why making Shrek 2 through 5 costs less to make than something like Treasure Planet 2 would have been. It starts to feel like the time and cost difference of a kid playing with action figures versus an oil painter. But the kid playing with action figures is actually somehow making really beautiful movies the more they do it. So even without money being a main issue, the learning curve for getting started in 3D animation is a lot easier than it is for 2D. You could even do it with overall smaller teams of people. Heck, a small handful of people could make a movie with the right knowledge and know-how. And you know what? Things like Blender are free. It started to feel like the new, most accessible playground for animation.
So let me get this straight. Cheaper, faster, easier to teach, smaller crews, less risk. It's all so convenient. Yeah, I've seen this kind of operation before. You don't replace a guy like 2D unless you want him gone. It was a setup. The corporation did it. The studios were the one who got rid of him. The call was coming from inside the building all along.
Over time, as CG was getting better, things like Tangled came out, where they really had to master hard stuff, human hair. And while it was absolute pain to work with, and could at any time lead to crazy rigging issues, with hair math breaking the entire thing, it went over so well that it proved to Disney that this CGI thing could be more worth it than they thought originally. From Chicken Little or Meet the Robinsons, which I at least liked better, but didn't particularly do well in theaters at the time. This might look like the final nail in the coffin, but you need to keep in mind, Disney didn't pivot completely away from 2D as soon as they discovered 3D animation. Though after Tangled, yeah, it was pretty much all they were making at that point, with the exception of 2011, the Winnie the Pooh movie. But it wasn't just the success of 3D movies that ended the 2D train, at Disney specifically.
It ended with Winnie the Pooh, huh? Well, at least it ended with innocence. What a way to go.
Meanwhile, 2D animation didn't disappear completely, but it was relegated to being the second-class citizen. It was harder, slower, and more getting associated with Saturday morning cartoon-level animation. Simple flash cartoon animations on TV became where you'd find most 2D animation, rather than cinema-level, full-length films anymore. The studio giants pivoted away from it, feeling it was too risky to invest in. More trouble than it was worth. So, while Disney animated movies like Frozen and Zootopia became 3D projects, they were still making TV series in 2D. Gravity Falls, The Owl House, they all stayed 2D. And that's nothing to sneeze at. Simple as they look at first glance, these shows could be beautiful when the artists were given the chance. Have you seen the scene in Gravity Falls when Dipper and Mabel show up? The way it spins in the forest? That's as impressive as anything I point out in Treasure Planet, the way it stitched 2D and 3D assets together so seamlessly.
Hold the phone. You're telling me it's still out there? Different scene, smaller gigs, but still working? That's not how the mystery's supposed to go.
Because truly, what we can't forget is 2D and 3D are actually used together a lot of the time. Sometimes it's a little rough around the edges, but over time it's actually gotten a lot better. I think one of the most recent examples of things like this is things like 3D scenes in Chainsaw Man, where it's hard to tell where the 2D ends and 3D begins. Other than the fact that you know it's not just one or the other from looking at it. And things can get more wild than that. For a few years now, we've had this popular new movie style all over the industry, where they still use 3D and 2D together, but in a way where they don't try to hide it anymore. Into the Spider-Verse famously created everything in 3D, but went back in 2D to hand-draw cartoon effects to make the whole thing feel more comic book-like. And it exploded in popularity, where it became the new style everyone wanted to see. It was a great thing to see after things started to feel so the same in 3D. It was the next big animation innovation to use both 3D and 2D together in such loud, graphic ways. A marriage that helped them both shine.
It's all so clear to me now. 2D and 3D, working the same job. Not competing, but collaborating. Partners this whole time. This isn't a murder case at all.
It's things like this that show us that 2D isn't dead. It's just out of trend with the studios for a long time. But we've seen it creeping back in. We've seen animated series get ambitious with it. We've seen movies adapt combination styles. And we're in the midst of yet another tech improvement for 2D. Before, the biggest leg up 3D had on 2D was the ability to make a rigged model once, and reuse assets endlessly. And 2D is starting to find ways to do that too. Programs like After Effects and Moho are finding ways to make 2D rigged characters, where you can change the pose, facial expressions, angles that you animated without having to redraw everything every time, if it's what the rig can handle. It's actually very impressive to see this. It can range from simple pinned limbs to full-blown models that you'd be shocked were 2D from how flexible they are without having to draw anything new. 2D isn't being left in the past, it's innovating, combining, and even with all of that, a few traditional projects are still turning up. The new Gorillaz album, The Mountain, is done in stunning digital hand-drawn animation over hand-painted backgrounds as a love letter to traditional animations, particularly referencing The Jungle Book. And that just came out. The love for this video has been hard to ignore, and I'm here for it. 2D isn't dead. 3D animation didn't murder it. Studios and money didn't murder it either. It's just been pushed out of the spotlight. But in this stage of hyper AI and tech adaptation, a lot of people are looking toward the nostalgia and the innovative ways to combine old styles with the new. And if the last few years of animation have proven anything, it's that artists are always going to keep experimenting, finding new ways to mix old tools with new ideas. Which means 2D animation was never really dead at all. It was just waiting for its next evolution.
Case closed. There was no murder. No killer, no cover-up. Just a missing person. Turns out, good old 2D didn't die, just changed with the times. Learned some new tricks and even works with the guy I thought was the murderer. Guess I let the nostalgia get the better of me. Happens to the best of us. You see, when you see something disappear, you start thinking the worst. But art doesn't die. It evolves.
That was a fun game, Eli. We should play that again.
I was playing. That was deadly serious private investigating.
Anyway, if you like art, animation, storytelling, and like to dig deep into how it all works,
And want to investigate with us.
then you should subscribe and see what we conjure up next. But this is all we've got for this video today, so we'll see you in the next one.
Bye guys.